curious, how do you hope God will change your life this year? As we enter 2026, there's questions around what this year will look like, what you're hoping to have happen. We had a low amount of people had New Year's resolutions when we met this morning as a serve team. How many, you don't have to tell your New Year's resolution, but how many people have one? Anybody? Yeah, this thing is fading. People are like, I'm done setting myself up for failure and not achieving them. I would offer to have something that you're moving towards is really helpful. It's hard to go anywhere if you don't know where you're going. It's hard to hit the target if you don't know what the target is. And there's so many ways of doing this, but I would offer that you could do a lot in your year and you could miss this question right here. That you could get a lot done, that you could implement those 6 life hacks, that you can do some good things in your life, but you can miss out on God moving in your life. And so this question here, how do you hope God will change your life this year? And what I love about it is it's accessible to everybody here this morning. If you're here and what you set out to do this year is I'm going to give church a shot. Maybe you've done it before, maybe you haven't. Maybe you follow Jesus, maybe you don't. Maybe you are skeptical or you're really drawn in. This is a great question to start with. God, how might I be hoping that you're going to interact in my life this year? And then for maybe someone who's been following God for 30, 40 years. The beautiful thing is about life with Jesus is you never master it. There is still more that God wants to do in your life. And if we don't pause and ask this question from time to time, we can get so busy just living our life and miss out on the one that God's inviting us to. And so what a wonderful question for all of us in this room, an accessible question to take a next step forward in our lives. A part of that really depends on our view of God. A.W. Tozer said, one of the most important things about us is the way in which we understand who God is. Because we could sample this room right now, we can ask questions of who's God, and everyone would probably say something different, there would be some overlapping themes. But you realize this, if you think that God is wrathful and vengeful, you could live your life in fear. If you think that God is holding out from you and waiting to punish you, you will live a life that lacks generosity and trust in other people. If you see God as benevolent and good, you have something to move into that is benevolent and good on the behalf of others. How we view God is one of the most important things for us to figure out as people. And so we're starting our series here in Jonah of who is this God. How many people are familiar with the book of Jonah? If you're a Christian, a non-Christian, if you've done church, if you haven't done church, what's the first thing you think of? The whale, yes. Did anybody try to come up with a better response No, we know it, right? The whale. The whale shows up for a second in the book of Jonah, FYI. It's actually not about a whale, though there is, it's actually doesn't even say whale, it's large fish. So anyways, we can look at this book of Jonah, we can think about the VeggieTale stories, we can think about just the cultural narrative of how we've tried to take this book and make it accessible to a 3-year-old, so therefore we just focus on the whale. And I love this quote here from G. Campbell Morgan. He says, "Men have been looking so hard at the great fish that they have failed to see the great God." That we think it's about this story in which now, a part of Christianity, you have to defend that someone is able to live inside of a fish for 3 days and get spit out, and the only difference is the pigment of their skin, and they can, the fish didn't chew it. That's what Christianity becomes. Has anyone ever tried doing that? I have. Guess how it goes? Not well. Hey, my whole God is based on this fish being a real thing. Now, I'm not saying that there is a miraculous act by the hand of God in that. But I think if we focus on, is the fish eating Jonah and spitting him out the most real thing about this story? Is it just a miracle about God operating inside of a fish? We could miss out on who God really is. Can miss out on the way he actually wants to interact in our lives. We can miss out on the way that he wants us to operate in life with him and the things that he has for us. So the most important question in Jonah isn't how did Jonah survive the fish? It's who is this God who keeps showing up in this story? Now, we're going to have some fun with this. I say fun. 4 of you might think it's fun. The rest of you get caught up on filling out the forms that we asked you to, and I'll let you know when to tune back in. But what's interesting is that the original hearers, when they heard this letter, when they heard this story, they would have had a number of assumptions already in their head. And we're pretty detached from that, so I think it's helpful to start there. As you notice, we're only getting into 3 parts of the passage today, and it didn't make much sense, and it was very simple, but there is a lot there. And it begins with this first assumption. I'm going to read it again, Jonah 1:1. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. He said, "Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me." The first thing talking about this great God I want us to recognize is that this is a God whose name is holy. His name is holy. I don't know about you, but I don't use that word very much unless you're like holy and then you finish that, right? That's like the most commonly word used, or like someone is like holier than art. Is that how you finish that? Out, art, thou, holier than thou. There you go. So I don't use that one very much either, apparently. But what this ultimately means is set apart. Something that is greater than you and I could imagine. When you see the word Lord in all capitals in this passage and in the Bible, what it's actually referring to is the word Yahweh, which actually isn't even a complete word. The Hebrew didn't have adjectives and other ways or vowels to fill in the gaps. And so it was Y-H-W-H, Yahweh. When we read the word Lord to the original hearers, it was actually a sacred name that it was so sacred it was not spoken. It was to not be spoken. The Jewish tradition is that this name is so far above, it is so great that we actually cannot speak it. I love, someone had actually said that this is not a distant God, this is a covenant God. It's the God who rescued slaves, made promises, and stayed faithful. Yahweh is not meant to be known. Yahweh is meant to be breathed. Yahweh. It's taking a breath in and letting a breath out. It's to actually personalize an experience with a God that transcends identifying him as a simple name. And so the book of Jonah does not start with a whale. It starts with how great God is, how holy he is, how majestic he is, how set apart he is. And yet at the same time, he is a God who has entered our story. He interacts with people, and we'll take the next step there. The text reminds us the God who calls us is above all, for all, and creator of all. The second one, this is the God who sends with authority. This word go. It could also, in some translations, say arise and go. He simply gives a command to Jonah to go to this great city of Nineveh. In the ancient world, this go wasn't just a suggestion, it was a commission. You and I exchange text messages, you and I exchange emails. We don't think much about the power of communication and the accessibility to it. Then, only the powerful, wealthy, especially kings, were the ones who had authority to send messages through other people. And so very quickly, they would recognize that, oh, this is the God who has authority over our lives to send a message, to send us, to send Jonah forward in what he was calling him to. What's remarkable is that God doesn't just send the angels when he wants something done. He sends people, which, like you, I question why he did it that way often. Because people are the worst. Like, we mess everything up all of the time. And so what do we do with that? Well, we look to a God who continues to invite human beings to participate in what he cares about, even knowing that you and I can resist. See, God's call is not about control. It's about inclusion. He's inviting you and I into a story, into one greater than our own, that we could live on our own, that we can fabricate on our own. Third one, this is the God who responds to humanity's cries. It says here, because its wickedness has come up before me. That is the reason in which God wants to send Jonah to Nineveh, to tell them to turn around, to stop being who they are. It's wickedness. This is the word evil, the Hebrew word rah. And this means that he's seeing something happening in real time that is not the way in which he wants people to go. And so may you go and correct them. Now, the original here would hear a few things. One, this phrase of the wickedness has come up before me. You could think about Cain and Abel, Abel's blood crying from the ground. You could think about Israel's groans as they were actually in slavery to Egypt, and their cries were coming out from being enslaved, and God heard them. They came up to him. The violence of Sodom and Gomorrah, actually reaching heaven, reaching God. He hears the pain of people. This is the kind of wickedness that isn't just moral failure, it's violence, it's exploitation, it's injustice. And then when God hears these cries, he doesn't start with destruction, but he starts by sending a prophet. We could think about Moses to deliver Egypt. We could think about Deborah, Gideon, and Jephthah to rescue Israel from oppression. We could think about Samuel as the prophet to call Israel back to the covenant faithfulness in which they committed to their God. Over and over again, as they hear these words, they're thinking back to the God that has been faithful to continue to move towards people while they were far off, to hear their cries of injustice, to hear the brokenness of the world, and to do something about it, to send someone, to invite others into the story in which he's trying to redeem. Fourth, this is the God who is patient and merciful. Go to the great city of Nineveh. This phrase, great city, rings throughout Jonah, and powerful, magnificent, extraordinary, all of those things. And what they would know is that this is one of the most oppressive regimes that they've ever seen. These were some of the most violent people that were known to humankind. Many have said that sending Jonah to Nineveh in the 8th century is like sending a Jewish prophet to Berlin in the 1930s to tell the Nazis to stop. This is not a neutral assignment. This kind of trip leads to, at best, brutal imprisonment. And they would hear almost the mocking of Nineveh in this. Anybody watch Saturday Night Live? Anybody read? You remember the little news article site called Babylon Bee? There's a word that holds all these together that's satire. They grab real things, make them look as worse as possible because they can, and they have a laugh with it as often as they can. It's wonderful stuff. But a little bit of this in Jonah is satire. What's coming up here is, hey, that great city, Nineveh over there. You would catch on very quickly. Wait, hold on. Great city compared to what? And they would know very quickly that if Nineveh is great, then God is greater. And the prophets assume something radical, that Yahweh is not just Israel's God, which is interesting. They are his people. He has made a covenant with them. He has invited them into life. Yet they see God bigger than them. They see God over every nation, every tribe, every people group. No matter how far they off they are, God is their God, whether they recognize it or not. He's the Lord of the nations, and every city is morally accountable to him. At first glance, Jonah looks afraid because of the reasons that we just stated. He does not want to go because he knows it will not end well. But Jonah 4 tells us the truth. I'm only going to skip ahead for this one moment. We'll come back to this in a few weeks. He runs not because Nineveh might be destroyed, but because it might be spared, which is interesting. Jonah 4, 1-2. But to Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord, "Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? This is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity." He doesn't want the people to be spared. He doesn't want God's mercy to meet them in their violence. He doesn't want God's grace to pour out so that they would turn around and find life in him. He's not scared. He wants to keep God to himself. He has cut off the fact that God can move in someone else's life. You ever done that? Who's off the list for you right now? I mean, you got a list. Like, very quickly, we start to play God. We determine who's in and who's out. Well, how could they vote that way? How could they believe that? How could they still do that? And, well, hold on, you can't. No, God, you can't. They need to be punished. They need to be corrected. And very quickly, we want to withhold God's mercy and grace from others. But boy, do we want it. Quickly. Why do I deserve it more than someone else? He's not afraid of Nineveh's violence. He's threatened by God's mercy. So before Jonah ever runs from God, we're meant to see this clearly. This is a God whose name is holy, who desires personal authority in your life to give you meaning and purpose, and whose heart is attentive to suffering in the world. And in his mercy, he is more patient and long-suffering to our brokenness than we could ever imagine. Jonah is not about a fish. It is about the God of the universe, the creator of all things, and the one who has reached down and grabbed a hold of your life to say, come and follow me. I have a different way. I have a better way for you. Which means Jonah's problem isn't that God is unclear. Jonah's problem is that God is too clear. He knows too much. But Jonah still ran. In 1:3, Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed to Tarshish. He went down to Joppa where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went abroad and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. What's interesting, the thing that caught me was this phrase of after paying the fare. After paying, like, why is that there? Such a random detail. Like, he paid someone to get on the ship. Why does that even matter? Whether he got on the ship or not, whether he paid, whether he, I don't know, jumped on without paying. The small phrase tells us more than we expect. Jonah, he could afford passage, meaning he actually had means. Most did not have means. The idea of this currency was even a newer thing. The amount of people that did not have access to currency. He had choice of mobility. Many did not leave their town their entire life. And he could belong to a larger world than Israel, larger than the people of God, larger than the world he knew. In Scripture, having options is rarely presented as neutral. Options can become escape routes. For those with means, more options don't always mean we're better off. They often mean it's easier to avoid obedience. You know when you depend less on God is when you have more stuff. You know when you depend less on God is when you can spend more. When you depend less on God is when you don't have as much need as other people physically. It's bizarre. It is frequently talked about in the Scriptures. Jesus uses our relationship to money oftentimes to tell larger things than just our money. Do you guys feel that? I can't speak for everyone in the room. I would say we have a middle to upper socioeconomic group here in this room. And again, I'm not speaking about everyone, and that does not mean you have to be in a certain category to be here. But watch out, because we can very quickly buy our way out of life with God. We just get busy and distracted, and we consume more, and we just don't need to depend on him as much. I mean, this is fasting and food. If you want to be reminded of your dependence on God, stop eating. Very quickly, when that first headache comes in, and you're like, why am I doing this? you have to turn to prayer and say, God, I want to depend on you more than anything I can do my own. How quickly we become out of touch with the poor when we have means. We forget what it's like to have need. The amount of people that is in their mind right now, not knowing where their next meal is coming from. And I'm like already guaranteed whatever meal I want after this. That's wild. Watch out. Does that mean quit your jobs and make no money? I don't think so, unless that's what God's calling you to. Watch out. Our stuff can grab a hold of us in a way that will rid us from God's life so quickly. Will distract us from God's work so quickly. And then we get a false sense of control. I could remember by 25, I started making six figures. Very quickly, had a taste of what money was like, especially coming off of being like a broke college student. That is a massive amount of money. And I remember starting to participate in the life of the church. And I remember this idea of giving to the church. And my first thoughts were, they're going to have to earn it from me. This is mine. I have earned this. Why would they get some of it? It's just a thought. I have full control. This is mine. You know, one of the clearest things that God talks about throughout the scriptures is that your life is not your own, let alone your money. Like, let's start there. But money's the hardest thing. Sometimes we're like, I'll give my life away. So, will you give your money away? Apparently not. Like, just how quickly it takes hold of our life. And then I became a church bookkeeper for $500 for some odd reason. And now I'm here. So maybe you shouldn't have life advice from me. But you know what I can tell you? Is money does not have the same hold of my heart anymore. Like every month, 10% automatically to this church. And then we look for ways to extend that, to go above and beyond, and to move towards the poor, to move towards the marginalized. I would not go back. I'm only looking for ways for that to increase. Because there's less of a hold. There's a freedom that can come when we say, this does not own me. I don't want this to take me from my life with God. I'll stop. So, Jonah, the beloved prophet, sent to a great city with the means to choose otherwise, does what many of us would do. He runs, he heads to Tarshish, and the text keeps telling us one quiet detail again and again. He goes down. He goes down. He goes down. See, Jonah's story doesn't ask, why is he so bad? It asks, where do we recognize Jonah in ourselves? And what this down is doing, he goes down to Joppa, and then he goes down into the ship. He goes away from Jerusalem. Yarad, he goes down, not just in the sense of going down to sea level like all those who go down to the sea in the ships, but also in a striking movement on the map of sacred geography. From a Judean perspective, all travel away from Jerusalem means going down from the Temple Mount where God is present. What this means is that where he was sat up on a hill, where the temple was up on a hill, where people sought the presence of the Lord up on this hill, and any movement down was moving away from the presence of God. Do I have that map? Is there a map? There we go. So he's in Joppa. God wants him to go to Nineveh. And where does he go? That is insane. That is like so much worse than just going and dying in Nineveh. Like, you should just go do that because you're probably going to die for how far you're trying to get away from God. But what it's indicating and what the author is trying to get us to see is that there is movement in our lives. We are always moving one way or the other. I think the idea of us being stagnant does not exist. We are moving away or we are moving towards. It can feel stagnating. But he is going down. He is going down. He is going down, away from the presence of Yahweh, his God. Every step away is a descent from holiness, even before the storms actually hit. Still just here in verse 3. And so, Jonah begins his downward movement, not just across the sea, but away from God's presence. He is running for his life, when in reality, he's running from his life. He's running for his life, but he is running from everything that he could have in his life and everything that his life could be. For us, the question, where are we tempted to follow Jonah's path, even in small ways? Where are you and I tempted to go down? Where are we tempted to run from the God who calls us, from the one who wants to send us with authority, with purpose, and with meaning, for the one that hears the cries of the broken world that he so wants, desires, and does restore, heal, and renew? So for us this morning, for you specifically, in what ways are you prone to run from God, from the God who's called you? I mentioned making a bunch of money at 25. I'm an Enneagram 3. Anybody? Enneagram people? I'm typed. Yeah, there's a few others. There we go. 6 figures is like the best thing to an Enneagram 3. And that's like more is better, really, is what it comes down to. My tendency, my leaning, is to move towards admiration, to applause, to achievement, to success, to manage an image for the sake of others, to control the way in which people would understand me. That is the life in which I live. I'm wired that way. And then I lived a life of athletics. I don't know what else could drill that into me even more, where you are entirely valued on your ability to produce. Can you do it or not? Are you good enough or not? I will tell you that is one of the places in which I run. That is one of the steep slopes in which I could go down and that could rob my attention from the call that God has on my life. To imagine that just having more or something different. I drive right now my sister's Toyota Yaris. If any of you have a Yaris, good job. They are lame. That's the last car I want to be seen in. And it's not even mine, it's my sister's. It's a whole scenario. They live out of the country. I'm car sitting for them. It sucks. I don't want to drive that car. It is the best thing for me. Can I be honest with you? Not having stuff, not getting what I want. Because I don't know about you, I have an idea of what my life should look like. And it's confronted every single day by how my life actually looks. Am I the only one? This is the great work of allowing God to have say in our life and allow it to be different than how we would say it to be. When's the last time your life looked different than the way you imagined it because God called you to it? When's the last time something cost you in your life because you've said, yes, God, you can have your way with me? When's the last time? Jesus referenced it being daily. There is a death inside of you and I every single day. Yet the interesting thing is that that's the exact thing that leads to life. It's the exact thing that says you don't need more, you need me. You cannot gain more on your own. It is better to give than it is to receive. last thing, I'm going to invite the worship team up so that you guys can play me off. I realize, and I wonder if this is helpful. I was baptized when I was 12. A couple of you may have heard some of my story, but I was baptized when I was 12. My mom here in the room, wonderful parents. They're so great, always the best. But really, like a good family, a good loving family in the church. And I always say I was baptized, but I never actually followed Jesus after that. It was going to be two very separate things. And what I followed was everything that I wanted. And there wasn't much that I wanted that I did not get. All the way through the years of high school into early college. And what happened is my life became completely destructive. There was points at which getting what I wanted was no longer good. It was only causing harm to me and to others. Over and over again, having more of what I thought my life should look like was the worst thing for me. It was not helpful to other people. It was not a movement forward in the way that God is trying to heal, redeem, and restore this world. And I can remember what I would call a second baptism. There was a night that God broke into my apartment. He drew near to me in a way that I still cannot fully explain, grabbed my heart and said, "Are you done yet? Are you done yet? I have a different way for you to live." And it looks like a way of surrender. And it looks like saying, "God, you've called me to life with you. What does that look like?" And over a long period of time, because none of us do this perfectly, it's a gradual process. The God who calls us has good things for us, but it comes when we actually stop and allow him to direct us and to guide us. To say, go to Nineveh. Go and tell them of their wicked ways for Jonah. But God is so loving that he also gives us choice. And so slowly over time, allowing him to have say in my life. It's the things that led to my wife and I stop having sex after having sex. That's hard. Like when we were dating, it was like, you know what? God might have something different for us. Let's not do that anymore. And then as we get into marriage and trying to do the kid thing and it not working out, like praying and like, do we adopt? Do we not? Getting into it and thinking, man, this is all we need. This is all we want. And then the Lord pressing upon both of us like, wait, hold on, it's not time yet. You know how hard that is? I remember sitting in my chair in a morning of prayer, and the thing that just hit me was forgive your biological father who you haven't talked to in 15 years. To just like Facebook pretty much a random dude and like be like, hey, forgive you. That's weird. The amount of power that God brought through that. Freedom. Like I could just keep going down these stories. And I thought about it this week. There was a guy named Roman in Sacramento. I was working at a sports nutrition shop. And this guy worked for Cintas, the place that like cleans mats and does utilities and paper towels and all that stuff. And every time he came in, he would talk to me about Jesus. And this was before the whole, stuff happened. And he would talk to me over and over again about Jesus. And what I'm realizing now for him, that was his Nineveh. That was him seeing his job. I mean, he's freaking replacing doormats at stores. And yet he sees a greater purpose to his life. Enough to talk to some random dude who doesn't have time for what he has to say. But you know what I know is he sensed that God was doing something in my life. Because otherwise I wouldn't have responded. Otherwise, Caitlin and I wouldn't have started going to some random college group that changed the trajectory of my life. Why we all sit here today. Some guy that was changing mats allowed God to dictate how he goes about his business that day. It's as if he woke up and said, God, who do you want me to talk to today? Who do you want me to share good news today? I wonder this year, What is God calling you to? What is he asking of you? Is there anything that he's inviting you to stop doing? Is there anything he's inviting you to start doing? Maybe there's something for you to give. Maybe there's something for you to receive. There's someone that you sense him inviting you to be. Because here's the good news. And I know this to be true because I've lived it. We all run from God at times, but Jonah shows us that we can turn around and come back. God doesn't call us to control us. He calls us to include us in his mercy, his heart, and his work of restoration. What a beautiful story we get to be a part of. What a beautiful thing that God gets to have say in your life. That you get to view your workplace with greater meaning than just a paycheck. That you get to be a part of a body, a member of a body on a random corner in the middle of Fresno. That you have people who want to encourage you. That there's a God who has people that pray for you to heal and to restore and to renew. That there's a God that says, you don't have to forgive them because I already have. Go ahead and just do it. Over and over again, what a beautiful life you and I get to live when we pause long enough to recognize the God who's called us, and so that we can allow him to keep calling us.